Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. I'm not an ag economist, so my presentation is going to be fairly broad and general. But I want to tell you a little bit of a story that I spent 2.5 years in the Senate. And yes, people can leave the Senate. It's not a sentence. And so when I went there, of course, I went with my passion for agriculture and really trying to ensure that I would try to make a difference there on the ag side. When you go to the Senate, you're asked what committees that you want to be on. Of course, I chose agriculture, and then I also asked either for environment or conservation, natural resources, and I got agriculture. But I also got national finance, which is the committee that reviews all of the estimates and also handles the budget bills. And I started in February in the Senate, and in May I was asked to carry the budget bill from the previous fall's budget. And, I was a bit puzzled. It was one of the omnibus bills. I had to work really hard at it. So I carried that bill through the Senate, and I went on to carry 3 more bills through the Senate in the 2.5 years I was there. And it was a puzzle to me, but, that was great. It was a great opportunity. And so then the leader of the opposition in the Senate started an inquiry on the impact of transfer payments and the calculation for transfer payments and the impact it was having on different parts of the country, primarily on the East Coast. And he started, of course, the inquiry with a speech, and then the leader's office asked me if I would give the speech back, and I went, okay, but I'm going to need a lot of information. So they drafted a speech for me. I went through it, and I said, well, I'm going to need this and these calculations, and I need to understand the whole history of the transfer payments. So I went to meet with the leader, research assistant who had done all this, and sat down and said, it's always been a puzzle to me as to why I have these I've been carried these bills, and you've asked me to do this speech. And she looked at me and she said, well, you're an economist. I said, no, I'm an entomologist. So let me start with that. Sorry, David, I know I've taken up 2 minutes of my time, but I have a fairly short presentation. Because what I really want to do this morning is to give you 3 examples of where I believe there are some successes in the value chain. In terms of value added, in commodities that we don't typically think of as being value added, and to give you an insight in terms of what some of those opportunities are that these value chains are taking advantage of, and then just wrap up with some recommendations. So the first one is canola. I was in the Canola Council of Canada in the canola industry for 13 years. The value chain organization there, where everybody sits around the table from grower right out to the processors and the exporters, seed companies, is the Canola Council of Canada. And prior to me being there, Barb Eisman was in and really said we need to set some targets. And the first target they set was 7 by 7. That's to get up to 7 million tons by the year 2007, because canola had really dropped down in terms of a choice for farmers. That goal was achieved, and the next goal was 15 by 15, and that was 15 million tons by 2015. That goal was achieved in 2014. The third goal is 26 by 25. That's 26 million tons by the year 25. And what this did in terms of having everybody around the table and setting this goal was essentially everybody was focused and targeted at that, all the way from the seed companies, the input suppliers, to the growers, and everybody was able to take a look, well, what are the limiting factors for us doing that? So, when you look at the Canola Council documents, and they talk about growth through partnership and innovation and setting these targets, essentially. The other component of it is the differentiation, and that is the market development program that they have that's focused on market development, very focused in specific countries. It's focused on health in terms of the lowest saturated fat, the best balance of poly and monounsaturated fats, and they've been highly successful in terms of getting into different markets. Well, is it value added? I would say it is in terms of canola, because we have that value added essentially that's across the prairies in the crushing industry, which is a huge industry, and you can see the growth that it has had. 3 new plants essentially have come on, and those plants cost around $125 to $150 million to build. And so the increased crush capacity essentially has led to the fact that there are more jobs, there is more value for the growers, and typically when you look at the production costs or the returns to farmers, most often canola is within the top 1 or 2. So that's canola. The other value chain is, I think, that is doing an amazing job, and that's the pulse value chain, led by Pulse Canada, by Gordon Bacon, and a tremendous focus on, again, issues very, very specific to the industry in terms of market access, transportation, because they have a slightly different issues in terms of transportation, the way pulses are moved. So I don't know how many of you know that this is 2016 is the International Year of the Pulses. Yay! Wow, that's great. Because I mean, there's been a tremendous amount of media surrounding that, and what a coup essentially for the World Pulse organizations to come together and convince the UN that they needed to be pulses needed to be recognized. One of the things that CIGI is doing, my organization, is working on pulse flours. Other organizations are working on fractionations of pulses. So although 90% of pulses are used, usually in a whole or a split form, we are looking very specifically at flours and the functionality of flour and this consumer demand for increased protein, increased fiber, and what we can do in different goods like pasta, breads, etc., to increase the protein and potentially the fiber as well. And we've got quite an extensive program, actually, with a very, very large UK baker, and looking at the inclusion of different pulse flours into their baked goods. So the value chain I'm most familiar with right now, working in right now, is wheat. And it's a relatively new, of course, organization that's looking at the entire value chain, and that is Cereals Canada, which has input from life science companies, from growers, and from exporters and grain handlers. And they really are about industry leadership. If you think about the Canola Council, it was formed in 1968. Cereals Canada was formed 2 years ago. And so it's really in an evolution stage. I keep saying to people that in terms of wheat, this is an evolution, not a revolution. You know, when the marketing changes came in, everybody thought that things would move very, very quickly in terms of associations, et cetera, and they have. But in terms of wheat and what we're able to do with wheat, it is a process that we need to continue to pay attention to. The Canadian International Grains Institute, that's us, we do the technical support for customers around the world. And I think we have to think about that this is really only the 4th crop that's being marketed by the exporters in a post-wheat board world. One of the things that I talk about when I talk about wheat is the fact that everybody thinks that wheat is on the decline. It's not. It's the number 2 staple in the world for food. The first is rice. The second is wheat. Consumption is increasing and production is increasing, and they are going hand in hand. So although you will see some ups and downs from year to year, if you look at this graph, you can see that it's on an incline. You know, in North America, are people moving away from bread? Yes, but that is typically a Western world issue in terms of the concerns over gluten. And we do not see that, of course, in many of the other parts of the world, especially parts of the world that, you know, don't have as much in terms of income, which is primarily where Canada sells into different markets. We have some developed markets we sell into, but we sell into a lot of developing markets as well. Just a little bit about CIGI. We have really, we're focused on providing that technical support to the whole value chain, but primarily to end-use customers. We have a pilot mill. It's actually on the 11th and 12th floor of a building in downtown Winnipeg, a bakery, a pilot bakery, a pasta plant, an extrusion plant, and an Asian noodle plant. And we are able to bring people in and help them understand the quality of Canadian wheat that they can use to make their products. So we're focused on helping them make their products. And if you take a look at wheat right now, I mean, the primary focus has been CWRS, which is Canadian hard red spring, and it's our typical bread wheat, but there are other classes of wheat that we're looking at right now that will perform differently in terms of Asian noodles and some of the hearth breads and things like that we're starting to explore. I just have a couple of slides on recommendations. One of them, I think that's really important, and if you talk about trust and the value chain working together, and customers that are going to choose Canadian and the branding that needs to go with that, not government branding, but industry branding, that the Ag Canada and industry roundtables have been invaluable in some areas. I think especially of the grains roundtable that we have right now that encompasses all grains and also oilseeds and pulses to some extent, but primarily the small grains. And it's had tremendous success dealing with issues that we have. The second one is, I don't know if you know Gordon Harrison with the Canadian National Millers Association. I've said to Gordon I want to hear him silent someday because he constantly talks about this, and that's the modernization of the Food and Drug Act. And it's an extremely old act, and it really is inhibiting the ability for entrepreneurs and innovators in some ways in terms of the slowness of it and the difficulty with it and the fact that it's not harmonized with the U.S. One thing that I found important working in the different value chains is the scientific capacity at CFIA. Not on the inspection side. I mean, yes, that side is very, very important. But within CFIA, it's really critically important that the scientists are available to deal with trade issues, and they have that capacity, essentially. And, you know, now that CFIA is under health, you know, the agricultural science side of it may get left behind, and it's important that doesn't happen. The last slide, really, in terms of recommendations, is that the Senate did a study on agriculture and innovation. That report came out to about 2 years ago. There's a set of 19 recommendations in that report. Some of those have already been acted on, but there's a couple that I've pulled out, essentially. One is the Agri-Innovation Program and the Canadian Agriculture Adaptation Program, and the importance of those two programs continuing. Secondly is restating agriculture as a priority area under NSERC. Agriculture researchers used to be able to essentially access NSERC because there was one of the priority areas was agriculture. When we lost that, then they had to go in through different priority areas, and we saw funding decrease in terms of NSERC. The last one that I'll mention essentially is harmonization in terms of trade. Extremely important, not just on the commodity side, but also on the value-added side as well. I'll end there. Really, you know, this is CIGI's logo. It really is, we're working for the value chain. And I think in terms of innovation, entrepreneurship, adaptation, yes, you are going to see the need for people to be able to work outside of these larger organizations. But there's a lot of innovation and a lot of opportunities to be captured working within the value chains, where at the end of the day, what we want is our customers to choose Canadian. And that's what we talk about all the time is when somebody thinks about wheat, canola, or pulses, it's about Canada and what Canada can do in terms of providing that. Thank you very much.